Hi, and welcome back to this week's episode of Heart and Health Wellness. I'm your host, Dr. Melissa Welch, and I'm very happy that you are here. If you are new to the podcast, just know that this is a place where we talk all about your biopsychosocial spiritual wellness and well-being, which is basically a big fancy way of saying that we care about what's going on with you physically, mentally, in your relationships, and then also how you find purpose and meaning in life. And so the last couple of weeks, we have been talking about self-care and redefining self-care as something that's not just a luxury or that you get to do because it is fun or you can fit it in, but rather that it is something that should be mandatory that you incorporate into your daily life as part of your regular routine. And so last week we talked about how self-care is related to your biological or physical health. And today we're going to be focusing on the psychological domain or how it deals with your mental health. I do want to point out that this is different than how it is related to your spiritual wellness or your social wellness, and that it's not just how you relate to others or how you see yourself in the world, but also just how you're doing psychologically in terms of how clear you're able to think or how you feel about yourself and whether you feel like you are entitled or worthy of self-care on a regular basis. So that's the kind of stuff that we're going to be talking about today. If you are new, I also want to bring your attention to the fact that I have created several free templates for you to use as you're trying to change your life and incorporate new habits into your routine. I've made one for daily, weekly, or monthly check-ins. And if you want to find those, I've left the link to them down in the show notes. So make sure you check those out. They're completely free to you. Okay, so let's go ahead and dive in. I want to start with a brief story about how I was at the beginning of the year after I experienced loss in the family and just how that grief affected my psychological well-being. If you have experienced grief before, whether it's a pet or a loved one or a friend or even an ending of a relationship, whatever it might be, you know that grief can be very distracting and make it very difficult to focus on other things in your life. You might have also noticed things like feeling fatigued or tense or sore, where normally you feel pretty good physically. You may have noticed yourself wanting to isolate or wanting to connect with other people. And so grief is one of those things where it's a psychological experience, but it also influences the other aspects of our health, like our physical health, our social health, and our spirituality. And so it's very similar that when we are taking care of ourselves or engaging in quote unquote self-care psychologically, it affects all of those different areas of your life. And so when I was experiencing grief and early this year, and even before that, honestly, I lost my grandfather, but he had been declining for some time. And so that grief was prolonged, right? But it was different once we lost him. And so that grief that I was experiencing required me to make sure that I was engaging in self-care psychologically. For me, that looked like engaging in more routine journaling than maybe what I would normally do, and talking to people that I'm close to about my grandfather, or making sure that I was getting up and taking care of myself instead of being sat on the couch, whatever it might be. So when we experience those things that are really difficult on us psychologically, it's important that we incorporate self-care into that routine, like we always should, but maybe more so than what you might typically do. So I just bring that up as an example to you that even those of us who are supposed to be really good at doing this on a regular basis, we don't always do it perfectly. And sometimes we go through challenges in life or experiences like when we go through grief where it's really difficult to keep engaging in life like normal, and it's important to make sure that we are doing that routine self-care. So just trying to give you an example there to keep in mind kind of what we're talking about when we think about the psychological domain. So Anything related to mental health, typically we think of things like depression or anxiety, but it could also be stressed or feeling overwhelmed or feeling like your brain is just totally full and bogged down with all kinds of things on your to-do list. Anything that's dealing with the brain and your mental capacity, memory, things like that, that's all psychological. So some common signs of psychological strain where these things might be suffering include things like brain fog, when you just feel like you don't have clarity at all and it's hard to remember things, hard to pick up on words. I know for me personally, brain fog became a much more serious issue when I got pregnant, I guess from hormones. And mom brain is a real thing. I actually was just listening to a podcast recently where she was talking about the science behind mom brain, which is a really cool thing that maybe we should cover in a future episode. But that brain fog, when you just can't think clearly, that's definitely a part of it. Irritability, if you're just stressed out or snippy at other people, that's a really good sign that maybe you've got too much going on. A lack of motivation. I mentioned just wanting to sit on the couch sometimes. And again, when it's things like grief, sometimes that's okay, but also recognize that if you're experiencing a lot of lack of motivation or you're not interested in things that you normally enjoy doing, that might be a sign that there's something more sinister going on. So those are some signs that you might be experiencing some psychological strain or some challenges with your psychological health. The reason that we want to be engaging in psychological self-care is because we want to make sure that we are, for the most part, engaging in life to the best of our ability, right? So is our brain going off and firing like it should be? Are we able to think and solve problems and think clearly at work to get things done? Are we able to bounce back and have resilience when we experience challenges? All of those are signs of good psychological health or feeling like you're at your best and ready to go. That is why we want to be taking care of ourselves in a proactive way so we can do that rather than trying to pull ourselves back out of the slump or the pit when we experience that psychological strain. It's much easier to do it from a proactive stance. And so that self-care helps us to do that in a proactive way. The psychological wellness that you experience is completely related to your physical health. When you're not thinking clearly, you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not going to feel like your healthy self. Same thing for your relationships. Like I mentioned, when you're going through grief, you might be pulling back or you might want to connect with others even more, which is going to be healing, right? But you might notice some shifts in what your normal routines or patterns might be socially. And then spiritually, when you're feeling down and yucky about yourself, you may not feel like you have a big purpose. You may wonder what you're doing here and why you're even living the life that you're living because you can't see the reason for it all. And yet when you're feeling really good about yourself, you're feeling confident and you're like, man, I can think clearly, I can do what I need to do, then you feel more excited about your purpose in life and how it's all coming together. So all of these pieces are intertwined. You can't take one out and silo it completely and say it's unrelated to the others. They all go together, which is what we've been talking about with this entire podcast, but especially today as we're thinking about the psychological component. So we also want to talk about how things like stress management might be viewed as a skill that you build just because you need to be able to do it, but it's actually a real strength psychologically if you can manage your stress. And what does that entail? Being able to identify when you're feeling stressed, or even before that, identify what might lead you to feel stressed, and then have a plan in place so that when those things happen, you're able to deal with them more effectively. For example, if you know that you're someone who does really well with deadlines and that you need someone to keep you accountable, that would be me, then making sure that when you're organizing things at work or in your own life, that you have a plan in place, a structure in place to make sure that happens. That way you are reducing the stress that you'll experience when you need to accomplish different milestones or whatever it might be. So making a plan for yourself to make sure that that stress doesn't become too much to handle. Same thing for decision making. If you're totally overwhelmed, your brain is going to feel flooded and crowded and overwhelmed, it's going to make it hard to make really big decisions that are important. And when you have decisions that come up, you want to be able to make them clearly and confidently. And so by having a nice proactive way of managing stress, preventing you from even getting overwhelmed in the first place, you're going to be able to make better decisions in a more timely manner. And the same thing for burnout, right? We often hear about burnout. It's a hot topic that everyone likes to talk about. And it's basically when you feel like you just don't care anymore. But the reason it gets to that point is because people feel like what they're doing doesn't matter. And a lot of that comes from feeling totally overwhelmed, not being able to do things the way that they want to, feeling sluggish, or when they try to, then they meet some kind of barrier, right? But if you have mental clarity and things are good and you feel resilient, you're going to be able to deal with those challenges as they come up. You feel like you're supported, you have community, you're less likely to experience burnout. So if we can do this from a proactive way to prevent burnout, it's a whole lot easier than trying to quote unquote treat burnout once it happens. Hope that's making sense. I really just want you to see what the psychological domain consists of and why it's important that we're taking care of it from a preventative stance rather than a reactive stance. I'm going to go off on a little bit of a tangent here real quick, but I want to give you a little bit of an insight as to kind of my vision for where we go with mental health in the future, because mental health falls into the psychological domain. Right now, our system is very much set up in a way that when you are struggling, experiencing depression, anxiety, overwhelm, burnout, whatever it might be, you go to a therapist to help you figure it out, sort it out, and get better. I would love to see a world one day where we are treating mental health as more a preventative measure, much like we do with the dentist, where you go to the dentist at least once, if not twice a year, to check things out, make sure it looks good. And as long as the dentist says, you're doing all right, they send you on your merry way and you're good for another 6 months, and then you come back for another checkup. I would love for mental health to become something where we are checking in with each other, with ourselves on a regular basis as a preventative way of making sure that we're doing all right. And if we need a little extra help, you have a cavity, we do a little treatment, we take care of you, and then we send you on your merry way and you continue to take care of yourself in a preventative way. I would love to see our world go in that direction. We'll see if it happens, but that's kind of my idea of it. So just know that that's where I'm coming from when I'm talking about psychological self-care, right? I would love for you to be able to check in with yourself on a regular basis, again, whether it's daily, weekly, monthly, or every 6 months, to see how you're doing psychologically, if there are things that you want to continue to do the same way, or if you need to shift things a little bit. So that's kind of an idea about how we can take care of our self-care on a regular basis in a preventative way. So here's some things that you can do. Here's 4 or 5 tips of things that you can do for psychological self-care. The first one is to have some mental boundaries. Now, boundaries is another hot topic that people talk about a lot, but this is what I mean by mental boundary versus maybe social boundaries that you might be more familiar with. Mental boundaries include recognizing, sorry, the cats are about to have like a total smackdown over here. Y'all be nice to each other. They're doing the stare down. We'll see if that lasts. Mental boundaries include things like setting limits for yourself, saying, I'm not going to take on too much. I can think of someone right now, I'm not going to call her out, but she was telling me that at work, her boss asked her to let them know, do you feel like you have too much going on? Let me know, because I don't want you to get overwhelmed, and you need to let me know so we can proactively make a change before you get to that point of being burned out. And last week she realized, yeah, I've gotten to that point. I need to have that conversation with my boss. And she was so glad that she did, because they were able to shift things and then it was better. And I'm really glad that they were able to do that. I think that's a great example of setting some boundaries for yourself. Being able to recognize this is getting to be too much. I'm taking on too much here. I need to set some boundaries so that I can continue to do what I'm doing well and not decrease my performance in this area to try and do even more, right? So reducing your cognitive overload is one. Saying no is another great way to set some boundaries. And that's not just to social events, but taking on tasks, taking on new roles. It is totally okay to say no if you don't feel like it's going to be building you, helping you, serving you in some way. People like to say no is a full sentence, and that is true. You don't have to give a reason for everything. It's okay to just say no to something if you realize that it's not going to be a great option for you right now. Okay, so mental boundaries. That's a good way to have some self care. Number two is self awareness. And I feel like I talk about this a lot, but it's really crucial to having overall wellness is to be aware of what's going on with you personally. So I mentioned one of the things that I did when I was grieving is amp up the amount of journaling that I was doing. And this is a really good way to have insight into what are your thoughts that are going on? What are the feelings that you're experiencing? And are you taking care of yourself? What are you dealing with? Journaling is a nice way of being able to take it out of the brain and put it onto the paper, which gives you some kind of power over it. As soon as we put our thoughts and our feelings into language and use words, it gives us the power over that narrative. And so journaling allows us to do that in a really helpful way. Mindfulness practice, another one that I talk about all the time, but y'all, there's plenty of research evidence that suggests it really is good. I personally have been trying to do more of this. I've been using the Calm app in the last several weeks, and I'm really enjoying it. And I think it's helping me be more in the moment. If you want to check out some other options, Calm is the one that I'm using right now because it has free options available. But I've also put together a PDF of my top 3 favorite meditation or mindfulness apps. And if you want to check that out, I'll leave that one tagged in the show notes today as well. But mindfulness is a really nice way of calming and quieting the mind, bringing your attention and focus to a centered place, and having some kind of mantra while you do that can be really helpful too. Helps you be more aware of your current state, how you're feeling, how you're doing. And it's just a really good practice to have on a regular basis. And then doing some self-reflection can go right along with that too. And again, journaling or mindfulness are ways of doing self-reflection. You can certainly use prayer as part of that self-reflection. A lot of people feel like that's the most helpful or natural way of doing it for them. And prayer is certainly a helpful practice to do as well. So the third one would be stimulation, and that's stimulating your brain so that it's not bored. And so doing things like puzzles or learning a new skill, picking up a new hobby, having some kind of creative outlet. I like to do something called Bible journaling where I'm coloring or painting or arting, as I like to call it, in the Bible itself. It's kind of like a scrapbooking meets journaling process that I really enjoy. And I don't get to do it a whole lot anymore, but I do enjoy it when I get to do it. Or just coloring in a coloring book. If you just want to get some markers or some colored pencils or even some crayons and do some coloring. If you have kids, this is a great one to do with them. I laugh at myself sometimes because I'll try and color with my son who's totally not ready to be coloring yet. And I get carried away and I'm really enjoying it. And I'm like, oh yeah, he's really not into this yet. Maybe we should find something else. But coloring can be a really good activity for you, even as an adult too. So find something that's fun, something that challenges you, something that gets your brain going and allows you to express yourself in a different way than what you would normally do on a day-to-day basis. The next one would be any kind of therapeutic practice. So, like going to therapy, talking to someone who's trusted and going to hold your information confidentially to talk about what's going on in your mind. Therapy can be a wonderful way to help you take care of yourself psychologically. I think I've mentioned before, I have my own therapist that I meet with these days, probably on a monthly or even quarterly basis. That's available virtually, which is really, really nice. But I like having a therapist available, even if I don't see them all the time. And again, that's similar to that concept that I shared of kind of that preventative checking in like a dentist would. So it may not be something that you need to do every single week, but having someone that you could check in with on a regular basis to make sure you're handling things okay and thinking through things appropriately can be really helpful. This one also suggests doing like a thought record, which is similar to a journal, but maybe not quite as intense, of really just writing down your thoughts and maybe what was going on that caused you to have that thought, and then challenging that thought with something that you know to be true and evidence of that truth. And that gives you a way to challenge those thoughts and then also look back. You can go back 6 months later and say, oh, I remember when I was thinking that, and I'm really glad that I've changed that now. So a thought record, not necessarily the same as journaling, can be a helpful way to therapeutically address any of those mental challenges or blocks that you're experiencing. So let's talk about what that looks like if you're actually applying that in your life. So if we think about the day, you might start the day with a mindfulness meditation, maybe 3 to 5 minutes in the morning to kind of calm yourself and center yourself. And then you go throughout your day, maybe you go for a walk at lunchtime and do some self reflection. And then at the end of the day, you close it out with some journaling and maybe consider how you felt that day or what were some of the key emotions that were coming up for you. Close it with prayer, something like that. So, those are some examples of what you could be doing on a daily basis. And again, I'll point out those templates for daily, weekly, and monthly reflections include some of these things in those templates that can be really helpful to you. So, again, I will also talk about doing small habit changes when you're trying to implement a change. Sometimes trying to change it all, overhaul it all at once can be really overwhelming and too much. So it's okay to try and change things little by little at a time. I was talking to somebody in the clinic this week and talking to her about food noise and food anxiety and how it's frustrating when someone else in the house brings things into the home that you're trying not to eat. And you can't control their behavior, but you can control yours. And so trying to find something to replace when you want to go munch on that sweet thing just because you know it's there, and replacing it, her example was going to the gym instead. Or it could be doing a dance, turning on a fun song, going and coloring, whatever it might be, but finding some kind of replacement activity. And so that's a really nice way of changing a behavior. But I told her it's okay if you don't do that every single time you experience the food noise or the food anxiety, like she was calling it. It's okay if you aim to just go to the gym one time when you experience this throughout the week. And maybe that starts to feel really good and you're proud of yourself. And so you do it more and more. And that's fantastic. But putting the pressure on yourself to do it every single time is a lot and can be too much and overwhelming. And then you might end up feeling like a failure or frustrated with yourself. And that's not helpful at all. So it's okay to focus on doing small incremental changes that are going to lead to big lasting change. Just keep that in mind. I know we've talked about it before, but I want to reiterate it again. So I want to do a quick break here to talk about a brand that I'm very passionate about. They are a women-owned small business based out of California, I believe, called We Are Ama. And if you're a new mom who is breastfeeding and you're looking for the most perfect cover for that, you definitely need to check out the cocoon from We Are Ama. It's breathable, it's stylish, it's comfortable, and I still use it. So even though we are past the breastfeeding stage, I still use it as a blanket. I use it as a shawl or a scarf. I use it as a cover over the stroller. It comes in handy so much. So don't feel like it's going to be a one and done. I had some of those stretchy ones. I asked for some of those stretchy ones and I did not enjoy them. They did not work the same way. They were uncomfortable. They were hard to pull out and they didn't always match my outfit. And I didn't like that. So those weren't great. The cocoon was absolutely fabulous. So if you're a new mom, definitely check them out. If you are shopping for a new mom, maybe you're going to a baby shower or something like that, either get the cocoon or get the new mama bundle that has a bunch of different gifts in it, which is really, really nice. All the things that she's going to need, including a cocoon. So those are great options. It's a wonderful business. And if you use the code Melissa, Melissa, you will get 15% off your entire order. So it's a really good deal. So check them out. I'll leave the link for them down there in the show notes as well. But really good brand. Just wanted to tell you all about that real quick. Okay, so how do you integrate your psychological self-care with the other components like your physical and your social and your spiritual self-care as well? Well, I already mentioned you could do things like going for a walk. That obviously benefits your physical health as well. You could also incorporate prayer, which is beneficial to your spiritual life. And you can engage with others either through therapy or through a support group or something like that, that might have an influence on your social life as well. So all of these domains overlap. So it's really helpful to think about how you can do a single activity that is going to be helping you in multiple ways, which is really nice. It all comes together. I also want to point out last week, I think it was last week or the week before, we were talking about sleep and restful sleep. And so if you remember, getting sleep is good. Getting enough sleep to the point where your body actually gets to rest and recharge is really good. And so sleep is part of that psychological domain, but it allows you to have better mental clarity. It allows you to combat things like depression and anxiety. Sleep is terrific for you. Restful sleep, I should say, is terrific for you. And so you get into this cycle where you're getting rest, and then you're feeling better psychologically. And then because you're feeling better psychologically, you're able to go to sleep better and get better rest. So there's this really beautiful cycle that happens once you get it going and you get that ball rolling. It's kind of like the chicken and the egg, right? Which one comes first? But if you're aiming to do both of those, have a good sleep hygiene, good routine, and take care of yourself psychologically, those things are going to come together really nicely. So I just wanted to tie that together from what we were talking about last week and how it comes into play with the psychological component. This really nice ripple effect that we want to prioritize as much as possible in a proactive way. Remember, you can't store up on sleep. It's not going to work like that. You can catch up. So if you're behind, try and catch up where you can, and then get yourself into a good routine where you're getting that restful sleep on a regular basis. Okay. So I'm going to give you some reflection questions that you can ask yourself. These are 3 questions that you can either journal about or reflect on while you're brushing your teeth tonight, whatever it might be. First one is, what is draining my mental energy most often? And this might lead you to find maybe there's some things that you need to say no to. Maybe previously were saying yes to, but they're not serving you in the same way anymore, and it's time to close that chapter. That's okay. So what is it that is draining your mental energy most often, and what could you do to try and help that so it's not as draining? Number 2, what small thing could I do daily to give my mind a break? Maybe it's that mindfulness practice, using something like the app that I'm using or one of the other apps to just have a few minutes of quiet reflection and focus and deep breathing. That could be really good. But maybe that's not it for you. What is one small thing that you could do daily to give your mind a break? And number 3, what helps you feel mentally clear and grounded? I know for me personally, I feel so good when, well, actually, I'm going to think of 2 things. The first one I was going to say, when I go for a walk or I do some kind of exercise. Even if it's just us going to the park and walking around, doing something outside, some kind of physical activity makes me feel so good. My brain feels clear. I just feel energized. It's a good place for me. The other one I was going to say is when I take magnesium at night, helps me sleep so much better, and I feel more mental clarity in the morning. And again, I'm sorry, I don't know all the science behind magnesium or why it helps with that, but I like taking magnesium. So if you haven't tried that before, maybe that's worth trying. But those are 3 questions that you can reflect on this week and do some journaling or just some quiet reflection on. Okay, so next week we are going to dive into the social domain of self-care, what that looks like and why it's important. And I want to remind you, if you enjoyed today's episode or you took something away that you liked, please give this show a positive rating, whether that's, 5 stars or a thumbs up, whatever it might be, whatever platform you're watching. That really helps a new podcast get up and get going, is to have those good reviews. So please consider doing that. And also, if there's someone I think would benefit from listening to this episode or the podcast in general, please send it their way. Maybe there's someone that can help hold you accountable to doing some of your own self-care routines, and you want them to hear kind of where you got that from. Maybe that would be a good person to send it to. But if you can forward this on, that would be a great way of helping me get out the word about the podcast as well. All right. Well, that is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm happy that you're here. And of course, you can always leave comments wherever you're watching or listening, or you can send me an email and I will be happy to respond to that either on the show or privately, whatever is best, whatever you're preferring. But I appreciate your support and I appreciate that you're being here. Until next time, take care of yourself and be well.